We did meet online. A photographer. I wound up taking his picture. We hit it off instantly. He was funny and charming and handsome. He was joking with me. He gave me his business card with his like phone number and was like, I would love to take this hot photographer out on a date and being like super cute. And it was just instant for us. The chemistry was amazing right off the bat, and we fell in love pretty quickly. He was exactly everything that I needed. He was everything that I wanted in someone, and he was that from the beginning. So he did let me know very early on that he was a recovering alcoholic. I really underestimated what it meant to be an alcoholic.
Mm.
I've never had alcohol run in my or an alcoholism like run in my family. I've never been with somebody with alcoholism. So I really underestimated what it meant to be an alcoholic. He had been sober from what he told me 2 years at that point. And I really never thought that he was going to drink. So things were going very well. He was working IT. He had a great job. He began working for me part time initially. And then in the spring of 2019, he quit his job and he came to work for me full time. It was kind of hard because it was like I was like the boss, like I'm like the female, and I was like the boss. But he was so intelligent. He was the yin to my yang for the company. So like I'm creative, right? But he was numbers and organization and all the things that I was not good at. So he came in, he did a great job. We realized financially we could afford for him to come on full time. So he did. Things were going extremely well. So when I tell my story, it's kind of almost confusing to me because I don't understand depression or alcoholism or triggers because I don't suffer from that. So he did relapse in July or the summer of 2019. Uh, and it rocked my world because it was something that I've never experienced before. His relapses were beyond something that I control, meaning like he would take a drink and then he would keep drinking for weeks. Like he was incapable of stopping.
Mm.
I'll never forget. I went to go get my hair done and then finding him in a parking lot, passed out from drinking. I actually thought he was dead then. And it was very traumatizing for me. And I just remember sobbing and being hysterical and was like, we're going to rehab. I don't care how much this takes. Like, we're going to get you help.
Yeah.
So for him in those instances, he did drink for a few more days, but he was able to get his act together, go to AA, get a sponsor, do all of those things, and things were doing very, very well.
Mm.
We had our relationship problems like anyone else. But we moved downtown Chicago. We got a beautiful loft. Things were doing really well. But he was still constantly struggling with alcoholism and addiction and depression. So we went through couples counseling just so I could understand, so I could be a better partner. I was definitely pushing him to go on medication, keeping him an AA. When COVID hit, though, he was no longer able to go to AA with people and stay in those groups. He kind of lost contact with his sponsor then. And he did relapse in April of 2020. And that was really hard. I'm going to be very careful of what I say, but it was when he would drink, he would become a different person. And I became kind of scared, uh, worried for myself, worried for my son. When he would drink, I would remove myself and my son and my dog from the situation, not because I thought that he was going to physically hurt me, but I was scared because he would become someone different when he was drinking.
Mhm. Can I ask you a question?
Um,
You were talking about the first time he relapses. I think it's important, for those of our listeners that are listening in regards about addiction and the progression of the disease. From the first time you saw him obviously drink,
Mhm.
Obviously could see that this is not normal behavior. But it just seems when the first time you kind of went through this, you were understanding, you were seeking, support and help and whatever I can do. And now this time it seems, from what you were sharing, that things got worse. Would you say they were progressively worse the second time you picked up?
Every single time got worse. Yeah, obviously the third time was the worst, but the first time was like, so I'll never forget being like, the first time he relapsed, I was like, we're gonna get through this. Like, it's not that big of a deal. Like, I didn't really. He got really drunk. He passed out. He was kind of, and I was like, it's okay. Like, we're like, this is no big deal. Like, we're gonna get over this. And I really underestimated that. After talking to his family, and his friends and a few other people, I realized that this was an ongoing thing, but I didn't know that then. But the first time he was able to sober up without needing to go to the hospital. The first time. The second time was progressively worse. Because he was suicidal, he was claiming to be suicidal then, the second time in April. So I contacted our couples counselor asking her for help because I said, he's claiming he's suicidal and he's going to kill himself. What do I call 911? And she said, if something were to happen and you don't, you will regret it. So I called 911 in April. It's a very long, drawn out story. But unfortunately, the police for downtown Chicago are different than than the suburb cops. So city cops and suburb cops are two totally different things. So the Chicago cops couldn't do anything. Like they wouldn't be able to do anything, they said. So I just was like, I called 911. I did what I could. I wound up coming home here. A lot of drama ensued, which I'm going to keep to myself, but it wasn't good. My family and my friends were very angry at him. They were worried for my safety, for Noah's safety, Ryan, for Ryan's safety. But he promised me he was never going to do it again. This was the second time, right? So he sobered up at the second time. Wound up going to AA. We never went to the hospital. So the first two times we never had to go to the hospital or go to rehab. Everything was pretty much settled and figured out pretty quickly with a sponsor and through AA. But the third time was obviously the worst time. So some of this stuff it's such a long story that I don't even know where to begin. We were living in the city. We were having a lot of riots happening. I got really worried about the safety for my son. I was just kind of over the city life because of COVID. There was nothing to do. So I told Ryan, I was like, I want to move to the suburbs. He didn't really want to move. I didn't understand why. But I was like, I know it's going to be a better life. Let's just go. And he started changing. I didn't know what was going on. He became really depressed, very on edge all the time. And I would confront him and I would tell him, I don't know why you're so edgy. I don't understand why you're depressed. Go see a doctor if you're depressed. Am I doing something wrong? Let's go talk to the counselor. What can I do better? If I can't fix your problem, if it's not about me, then it's now something that you need to do, So I put that on him. And he kept saying, I'm depressed. We'll go to a doctor. Well, I don't want to. Go back to AA. Well, I don't want to. You can't tell me what to do is kind of what I started to hear. So I made the decision to move to the suburbs. I told him, I'm going to the suburbs. I love you. If you don't want to move with me, I don't know what to tell you, but we need to move to the suburbs. You're not telling me why we can't move to the suburbs. So we moved to the suburbs. We weren't there for very long. When he relapsed, we moved in August 1st and, he wound up relapsing on August 15th at a wedding. Our therapist saw it coming. I wish she could be watching right now, but she actually saw it coming. She kept telling Ryan, you need to go back to AA. You need to go back and get a sponsor. you're depressed. I understand you're depressed, So when he did relapse, she wasn't very surprised. Um, People ask me what caused the trigger. I don't know. I knew he was depressed. I didn't know why. We had a beautiful relationship. We had a beautiful business. We had a beautiful life. Didn't understand. I loved him. He loved me. Even in his letters, he just didn't know why he relapsed. And when he relapsed the third time, there was so much destruction in his path after his third relapse that there was no recovering from that, which is why he decided to end his life. He wound up getting a fifth DUI, which meant that he was going to be going to prison for 5 to 15 years. I told him he could no longer work for my company because that was his third time relapsing, and I didn't feel comfortable him working anymore. Our relationship was strained. All this money was spent from now lawyers and getting his car impounded. It was difficult. The story is very long. He, just wasn't in the right place of mind. He wound up flying into Seattle after the day that he got his DUI because I think he was planning to kill himself actually in Seattle. But I begged him so much to come home that when he did come home, I said, if you come home, we're going to the hospital. He was at that point, I don't even know how long he'd been drinking. It was the end of August at this point. But the last straw was when he came home from Seattle, refusing to go to the hospital, get him to the hospital, refusing to be admitted into the hospital. I mean, it's just I did everything I could. I stood on my head. I cried to him. I yelled at, nothing worked.
Yeah.
I was just at my wit's end. I needed help and there was no one that was able to help me. I didn't have his sponsor's number and he had his phone. So I was unable to call his sponsors. But he kind of ruined that relationship with his sponsors. So, and I never had access to them. I told Ryan at one point in late August, I said, you're welcome home, but you can't be drinking. And if you come home and you tell me you're suicidal again, I'm going to call 911 again. Because I called 911 in April. I said, I was going to call 911 again. And he came home. I asked him, he said, I'm still suicidal. I felt like I had no choice but to call 911. It wasn't a decision. Oop, my thing is. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
It wasn't a decision because I was trying, to do anything other than get him help.
Yeah.
I just was lost. No one could really help me. I needed to get him into rehab or something. And I kind of put a lot on myself. And I feel like for Ryan, he felt like he was such a burden because I was putting so much on myself, making it my responsibility.
When you took him to the hospital, you said you called 911. When you made those calls, what walk us through that? When you picked up the call, did they come? What was the process? What was their process in dealing with him?
Process was terrible because initially this woman just this whole thing is just fun. But anyway, this woman police officer, I think she meant well, and I'm sure they see stuff all the time. They see domestic, they see crazy women all the time. But the woman was like, are you trying to get a restraining order? Are you trying to be dramatic is basically what she's saying. She's like, are you just trying to say he's suicidal so you can get a restraining order? And I'm like, no. This is no, lady. I'm I just need someone to help me. Because she said I was acting very calm for someone who was claiming they were suicidal. But I'm grateful for the paramedics. Paramedics came. They were the ones that like assessed him, but he was so out of he wasn't in the right place. And the paramedics were like, we have to take you in. He was extremely intoxicated. My family was really upset that I stayed with him because they were like, because it was actually my brother's birthday. And we were going to go out to dinner that night with me and my family and my brother. But because I was doing this, I was no longer coming. So my family was very upset, rightfully so. But I knew I couldn't leave Ryan because he was so intoxicated that I was afraid that I knew they were going to have to restrain him if he were to be acting out. And he, I don't know if you saw pictures of him, but he's a huge muscular dude. And I was afraid that he was going to be throwing punches or something. So I wound up going with him to the hospital. He kept trying to put his street clothes on and leave. And he was like, you can't make me stay here. This is controlling. Or like, I don't love him, but I'm like, this is crazy, And I stayed with him. So we got there at 6 p.m. I was really upset. I was just kind of having my own internal battle too, because I was like, this isn't normal. Like, I shouldn't have to be doing this. Like, this isn't fair. Angry at myself, angry feeling like I'm allowing this, angry that my family is angry at him. It was just a lot of, and anger is a second form of actually being hurt. So I was hurt first, and then I was angry, I always say this very often on TikTok is you can love someone and still be angry at them. So I still loved him, but I was very angry. So he begged me to stay with him all night. I didn't want to, but I said, Ryan, if I stay with you all night, you need to admit yourself for suicide and addiction. And he goes, I promise, I promise, I promise. So when he was finally admitted to the hospital, that was the first time since he relapsed in the beginning or in the middle of August that I felt any form of relief, because I knew that he was safe. I knew that he wasn't going to be drinking and driving. I knew that he was going to be sober in the hospital. I knew that nothing terrible was going to happen while he was in the care of the hospital. Hospital was amazing, but because of COVID, they can only keep you for so long. So they didn't, he's great. He's a great talker. So he was able to convince them he was fine and was no longer suicidal and could go home and do inpatient care. Well, when he came home, we contacted a lawyer, and the lawyer was like, there is nothing I can do. This was your fifth DUI. You are going to be going to prison. And I think looking back at the dates of his letters is kind of when he made that decision right away that his life was over. That, he just didn't want to do that. There's kind of more to it, like, cause obviously like our relationship was strained, he ruined the relationship with the business, his family was upset. My family was upset. There was all this damage in his path, and in his mind, by ending his life was going to be the best decision for him, is what he thought. On the day that he passed away, he was in a great mood. He was happy. We had a great day. We had photo shoots. Everything was awesome. We made plans to go apple picking the next day. So this was, on August 12th. The next day was going to be a Sunday. We made plans. And I was like, okay, well, because he was in such a good mood that day, I didn't think I had to watch him. And I know that sounds silly, and it's not like I was crazily watching him. And in some ways, I actually did not actually think that he was actually going to commit suicide. But I felt like it was safe for me to leave for just a couple hours. So I was running an errand. Ryan calls me and it was like, hey, I actually don't feel well. Why don't you stay at your mom's? And, I'm just going to stay home. I'm like, that's weird, but like not enough to set me off, like not enough for me to question that he was suicidal. Because my son is immune compromised. So sometimes I do stay at my mom's house.
Mhm.
But I was like, no, I'm going to come home. Like, I'll see you in a little bit. And he's like, okay, I love you. And even though I was frustrated at him, I did say, I love you too. And those were actually the last things he heard from me. And I'm grateful. If I didn't say I love you back, I think I would have regretted that. Um, but something in my head said, say I love you too. And I did. Because sometimes when I'm really angry at him, I wouldn't say I love you back, but I told him I love you too. I came home after running my errand, and it was very odd, and I knew something was wrong. The TV was on, and I found him on the couch, and I was very confused because it didn't look right. I'm not going to share how he killed himself out of respect for his family. His family has kindly asked that I don't share. But the minute I realized what was happening, I don't remember if I started CPR first. I think I started shaking him first. He was extremely white. It was really dark in the house though too, so I couldn't realize how white he was. But I called 911. I remember 911 telling me that they couldn't understand me. I remember breathing like I'm trying to breathe now, being like, I kept hearing this voice like, you need to take breaths, you need to keep breathing. Like, so I was able to finally have 911 understand me. I'm really, really impressed by my suburbs police department. So I came home at 11:11. I called 911 at 11:14, and a police officer was there at 11:19. So they were like there within less than like 5 minutes. It was amazing. I tell people that I was concerned of hurting him, getting him on the floor to do CPR, because I'm like 130 pounds. He was like double my size. I do. This is kind of graphic, so if anybody's watching, please be careful. But I remember doing CPR on him, and there's a term that's called the death crackle. And I actually heard this while I was doing CPR on him. And at that point, I knew in the back of my head that he was already gone, but there was like this little bit of hope that I caught it in time because he was actually warm